Hello everyone, and welcome to Beginner Coding with Python. We're going to do a quiz walkthrough today with the for loops quiz. So this is available on the GitHub repo under the quizzes folder. All right. So let's pull up that file and let's get going. All right. So go ahead and hide that. So in Python, we've already learned how to create an iterable like a tuple or a list and access the elements of that list via indexing. So if I'm just looking at something like students, for instance, this is a tuple with 5 elements. If I want to access the first element, I can use an index of 0 to get to Jan, an index of 1 to get to Bailey, 2 to get to Will, 3 to get to Boris, and 4 to get to Stacy. Additionally, I have a tuple that's defined as student test scores, and inside that student test scores, I have several lists. Each list here corresponds to the student's entry in the students element. So I have Jan's test scores, 45, 75, 90, and 80. Bailey's are 95, 95, 98, and 97. Will is 65, 70, 85, and 75. Boris is 85, 90, 85, and 83. And Stacy is 99, 99, 98, and 97. Stacy is our breakout winner. We're really happy that she's with us. All right, so the challenge of this quiz is that the below code will print the first 3 students' name and GPA. We want to modify the code to print all 5 students' GPA without increasing the number of lines of code. And we want to dry that code out, right? We don't want to repeat ourselves, and that's what dry stands for. Do not repeat yourself. We want to dry out that code so that we're not doing index calls on student test scores twice. So let's look at this. In order to print the first 3 names, we use a print statement 1. In the first one, we look at our index 0. We pull out the students' test scores, and then those test scores, we sum them up and then divide them by the length of the student test scores. That gives us an average, right? Our GPA that we've got going on here. Now, it might be tempting here if you just want to resolve this problem quickly, we can definitely get all 5 of these out, right? We can duplicate that line, we can change it the index to 3 here, and 3 here, and we can do that again. We can change it here, here, and here, right? If we were to save that and run it, what do we get? Oh, look at that. Jan, Bailey, Will, Boris, and Stacy. This technically solves the issue, right? I'm getting all 5 students out, and I'm getting their GPAs. But look at what I have to do in order to do that. I have 5 different lines of code, and you can only imagine if this starts to grow. If I add an additional student like Linus in here, and Linus joined us, and he wasn't doing great. Let's say he's probably about to drop out because he just kind of fell behind on us here. But if I run this, well, where's Linus? Linus isn't in here. I have to go in here. I have to add it again. I have to change that index, and God forbid I accidentally hit a 6 or I accidentally hit a 2 here, and I forget that that's what happened. Well, what's going to happen? All of a sudden, Linus is showing 73.75, but that's Will's average. There's no way he has 73.75. He didn't have a single score above 70. So I'd have to come back in here, find where I made my mistake, save it again, run it again, and what happens? Oh, there's his average, 34.75. So how do we simplify this? How do we reduce the number of lines that we're using and make things better? Well, we can see we're repeating ourselves over and over and over again, and really the only thing that's changing is our index. Well, we know a couple ways that we can do that. We can generate a series of numbers using the range function, right? So I can say range. And what should I pass into here? Well, I want the length of my instance here. Okay, so we're just going to stepwise this. We're going to get to a really optimal solution, but we're going to start with some of the simpler stuff that we know, right? So if all I want to do is change the index, well, I can do this for index in range. And in this case, I'm going to use the length of our students in order to get that. And then I can say, hey, that's great. I can set the, student equal to students index, right? So now I can use that index, I can assign it to a variable, and then I can say, hey, those scores is equal to student test scores index. And then I can eliminate most of the rest of this, right? I can select all this, I can get rid of it. And now I can print, instead of printing students here, I can change that to student. I can take the sum of the scores that come out of here, and I can take the length of the scores that comes out of here. And now, if I run it, what happens? I get exactly the same answer. Except now, if I add another student or I drop a student, Linus just realized, oh my goodness, I am not cut out for this. I'm really good at something else, but coding is not my particular thing. I'm dropping the class. So Linus drops out, and now we run again, and look at that. Linus is gone. I didn't have to update anything. All that changed was this list. Okay, this is helpful because remember, this is referring to students here. And then using that, I get my way out. Okay, this isn't too bad. I mean, I can go through the length of the students. I can call this item out. But remember, I said I wanted to do this in less lines of code. I just went from 3 lines of code to 4. Now, granted, this 4 lines of code works great and will work for any length of students. So it's an improvement. It's definitely an improvement. But let's do something additional here. Okay? So maybe what we want to do is, instead of going through the index here, I want to just directly assign the student out of students. So remember that when we use a for loop, what we're doing is we're making this statement up here in the for statement. What we're doing is we're saying, hey, for every element inside of this iteratable, each time you hit a new item, assign it to a variable for me. Okay, so now what we're going to say is for student in students, and now I can eliminate this. It's all well and good, but the problem is now, how do I tie it together with the scores inside of student test scores? Okay. Well, we can definitely start here. I mean, we could assign an index, set that equal to 0, and we can go ahead and grab the scores out. And every time we run this loop, we want to make sure that that index gets iterated up by 1. And now this will work as well. Great. Let's take a look. Same thing. Okay, this works great. Fantastic. Now I'm able to grab that index and I'm able to iterate it. But again, we actually just added a whole other line, right? Now we're at 5 lines of code because I not only had to go in here and assign it, but I have to pay attention to this index. I have to iterate the index here, and now I'm not following separation of concerns. My index exists outside of this loop. My index exists inside of this loop. God forbid I go to try to refactor at some other point. Now I've got to have this index in 2 places. So what can I do to fix this? Fortunately, I have an option here. What I can do is I can use a function which will generate an index for me for every single element that I iterate through inside of here. So I can eliminate this, and I can eliminate this. That function is called enumerate. Okay, so let's pull up the documentation and look at what enumerate does for us. So what does enumerate do for us? Enumerate returns an enumerate object, obviously. It's an iterable that I can use. And what does it return to me? It's going to return to me the count of the item, as well as returning to me the actual element out of that iterable. And it's going to return that to me as a tuple of a size of 2. So remember what we can do with decomposition. If I'm iterating through an item and that item itself has an iterable inside of it, I can use decomposition in order to directly assign those to a variable and then use them. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to say, hey, for index student in enumerate students, and now I can eliminate this piece of code, and now I can eliminate this piece of code. Okay, and now for the first time, I have a solution that meets the requirement, right? It's printing all 5 students without increasing the number of lines of code. I've done it in 3 lines of code. And now, if I expand the number of students from 5 to 12 to 50 to 5,000, no matter how big this incoming list is, I'm still going to be able to print everything. So this is the first valid solution. It's dry, it does everything that we need, and it gets it done. I love it. I love it. But we can go one step further. Similar to enumerate, we have another possible option that we can use here, which will directly return the items that we want without us having to do an index lookup. That second step that happens here in 26. We use that index in order to grab the item and place it in here. And that is called zip. Zip is a built-in function which will return to us a tuple of matched pairs. That is, zip will say, hey, students and student test scores, give me the first element and give me a tuple of Jan and this list. Then it will give me Bailey and this list. It will give me Will and this list, Boris and this list, Stacy and this list. So let's look at the documentation. Okay. So again, we're going to go here, and instead of enumerate, let's take a look at zip. There it is. So it takes iterables, any number. I could have 5, 12, 15, doesn't matter. But I can zip those together. And here I've got a range 3. And these elements, v5o fum. Now zip automatically is going to stop at whichever one's the shortest. So in this case, a range of 3, it's going to just give me phi, phi, and fo. And fum is going to get cut off. So it returns to me that list, those elements, as a tuple of those two together. So let's take a look at that inside of our application here. Now I can use zip, and now I want students, and now I want student test scores as the second item that I pass in there. And now instead of index and student, what I can do is I can do student and scores. Now, of course, it's going to start highlighting because index is no longer defined. So I need to eliminate this line. So when I eliminate this line, what do I get? Student and scores pass directly in here. And what happens at the very end? I get all 5. Now I've done it completely dry. I don't repeat myself a single time. I don't do any additional index grabbing. I don't have anything else that I have to do. I just reduced from 3 lines to 2, and this does everything that I need in just 2 lines of code. Okay, so we'll review here. Our first option was to simply go through those indexes, right? So we're going to do a for index in range, and into that range, we're going to pass the length of our students. Okay. Now what we can do is we can apply, hey, that student is equal to students index, right? And our scores is equal to student test scores index. Great. And just like we did here, now that we've got those assigned, well, I can just pull this line up. Now I've got everything that I need. So this is work. This works. This is functional. I can assign an index outside of a loop. I can go for student in students. I can assign my scores via the index. Make sure that that index gets incremented. And then, of course, I can, print that out. Again, this is not one we commonly want to use at all, right? The above solution is actually more elegant than this one. But I can assign the index and I can assign the student using an enumerate. I can assign the student. I can assign the scores via the index, and then I can print it out. And this is a valid solution here, but I can reduce that assignment here by using a similar function called zip, and I can get the student and the scores directly out using that zip function, and then I can print the student and the scores directly. And just remember, when it comes to coding, there are many valid solutions to any given problem. And there are good reasons to use each of these approaches, but you'll learn over time which one to use and which one not to use. But all of these are significantly better than what we started with, which was that we had to go and individually enter that index. It was inflexible. It was not maintainable. All right? So thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So long, and keep on coding.